Well, this morning we are looking at this story of Joseph, and Joseph and his story is one of the singularly greatest stories, in my opinion, in all of the Bible. And in fact, it is a massive story. It's a long story. You know, the book of Genesis is pretty darn long, and the story of Joseph takes up roughly 25% of the whole book of Genesis. So a quarter of the whole first book of the Bible is devoted to this story on Joseph. And so I'm kind of bummed we can't do lots of weeks on Joseph because it's an amazing story, but we're going to try to do 30 years in 30 minutes. That's the goal, and I think we can make it, or at least come close. So if you don't know the story, if you don't know about Joseph, you haven't heard in a long time or whatever, you're not familiar, that's okay. Joseph is a story. It's a tale of transformation. Because when we meet Joseph in chapter 37 of Genesis, he is 17 years old, and he is a smart-mouthed little punk. He is a talker. He is arrogant. He is rude. He offends people when he speaks to them, most of all, his own brothers, of whom he has 11. That's who Joseph is to start. By chapter 50, we get to chapter 50, we see that Joseph has been transformed over the course of a couple decades into a humble servant ruler. He has become like the prime minister of ancient Egypt, which is at that day like one of the most powerful countries in all the world. And because he's a humble servant ruler, he has figured out a way to feed most of the ancient Near East through time of severe famine, through 7 years of severe famine. You go, man, how does Joseph get there? How does he go from smart-mouth punk to humble servant ruler of like all of ancient Near East? You go, Joseph, well, he must have had all the right connections. He must have gone to all the right schools. He must have built the right resume. He must have the right internships, right? Wrong. His story is completely opposite of that. Joseph did not go to school at Harvard and get an MBA. He went to the school of suffering. He went to the school of hard knocks. And so what Joseph does in this story is he raises for us a very ordinary question. He raises for all of us a big question, but a question that all of us, whether you're a person of faith, you consider yourself a Christian, wherever you are in your faith, you've probably asked this question. And in fact, for most of us, it's a question that often will prevent us from trusting God, from walking with God, from continuing with God, even from believing in God. And the great question that Joseph's story raises is, if God is real, if God is so good, then why is life so hard? If God's so good, why is there so much pain? Why is there so much brokenness and sickness in the world? What is actually happening? And so God's going to answer that question through a beautiful story of Joseph, and it is a beautiful story. I mean, this story has been hailed as a literary masterpiece. I mean, it was turned into a Broadway musical that ran for years and years. It was a historical masterpiece. But this morning, I want it for all of us to become a personal masterpiece. That it would come into your life and speak to and name and heal the broken people and places and things in your heart, in your life, in your world. It's a massive question. Why? Because all of us are in this in at least one of three categories. You say, well, I don't even believe in Christianity. You're still in one of these categories. At least one of three categories. Either you have suffered in the past, you are suffering in the present, or you will suffer in the future. You're in at least one of those three places. You have, you are, or you will. What about Joseph? How does that show up in Joseph's life? We read chapter 50. We read the climax of the story, but you can hear the allusions to what has happened. Look at verses 15 to 17 in chapter 50. It says, when Joseph's brothers saw their father was dead, so we know the story about Joseph and his brothers and a dad, they said, it may be that Joseph will hate us and he'll pay us back for all the evil we did to him. So right now you've got hate, you've got betrayal, you have suspicion, you have evil, and you have all this playing into the story. So they sent a message to Joseph saying, your father gave this command. Now, it's their father, but they say, your father, your daddy said this. We want you to know it was your dad, not just our dad, but it was your dad that said this. And this is almost certainly a lie that they have made up to protect themselves. Say to Joseph, please forgive the transgression of your brothers and their sin because they did evil to you. And Joseph wept when they spoke to him. See, there's been transgression, there's been family dysfunction, there's been family brokenness, there's been betrayal and suspicion and lies. All of this plays into this amazing story of Joseph. What is all that? Who were his brothers? Why is he weeping? What is going on in this story? We have to know a little of the background. You have to go all the way back to chapter 37 when, as I said, Joseph was this young 17-year-old know-it-all, mouthy punk. And that's who he was. And guess what? He was not only that, he was the 11th of 12, so he was almost the youngest, and he was his dad's favorite. He was the favorite, and chapter 37 says he was so favorite that his dad made him a colored robe, a mini-colored robe, the Technicolor dream coat, if you will, that he makes it and he puts it on. He's like, that's my favorite son. I want everybody to know, like, he's the best. He's my guy. Now, this is somewhat crazy because that same kind of favoritism has already played out in Joseph's dad, Jacob. Jacob is going, that's my favorite son. But that same favoritism has already played out in Jacob's life. If you know anything about Jacob's story, if you were here last week, Jacob was the son, he was a twin brother, and he was his mom's favorite, but his brother Esau was his dad's favorite, and it just blew up his family. It exploded his family. It divided his family. And you can probably bet that most of his life, Jacob did something like most of us do and go, I will never do that to my kids. I will never be that guy, that dad. I will never do what my dad did to me, to them. But he now has favored his son, and his brothers hate this son. Why? Because in many ways, Joseph literally is the brother from another mother. If you know the story, Jacob not only commits the crazy, horrible sin of polygamy, he marries two women, but he happens to marry two women who are also sisters. So he marries multiple women, but they're also sisters, Rachel and Leah. And Rachel is his favorite wife, and Joseph is Rachel's son, and so Joseph becomes the favorite son. You see how this works out. And now he's repeating what we would call what? Generational sin. This is generational sin. It's playing out over and over again in cycles. And as much as we want to think we can escape those things, we have so much of this in our own families, right? Almost every family I've ever known, almost every family I've ever met, there is one who, like Joseph, wears the coat, right? There's one who's the favorite of one parent or the other or whatever. There's one who wears the coat. And the one who wears the coat wears the expectations of success in the family, and the ones who don't wear the coat wear the expectations of failure in the family. And then people start to play their roles. See, maybe you were that in your family. Maybe you were the one who wore the coat. Maybe you're the one who despised the one who wore the coat. Either way, all of us, at least at some level, have some measure of generational sin that just plays out. And we go, I'm gonna leave that. I'm not gonna do that. But then, before we know it, we are just like our mom, just like our dad. When I was growing up, I was one of those kids that had to have an answer for everything. And I was always pressing my dad, like, why this, why that? I don't understand. Why are you making me do this? You know, I had to know the logical explanation. And eventually my dad would just get frustrated. And what would he say? Because I said so. And I couldn't stand that. I mean, it's like, give me an answer. You don't say because I said so. And then I had my kids. And my oldest son was a precocious question asker that needed an explanation for everything. And one day he was pressing me. And finally I said, I don't know because I said so. I've become my father. All of us are shaped by the good and the bad from our family. That's a funny example, but Joseph is seriously stuck in a dysfunctional situation, and some of you know what that is. You know what it is to be from a broken family, from a dysfunctional family, from a messed up deal. And what the story of Joseph is going to tell us is that God is so great and he is so powerful that he is strong enough to break even the most deeply ingrained, cyclical, long-time generational patterns of sin. That he can come in and liberate and eradicate those from our lives. That's what he's going to do for Joseph. So what happens to Joseph? Well, Joseph, we find out in chapter 37, he has two very vivid dreams. And instead of keeping them to himself, he's like, you know what? I'm going to tell my brothers about the dream. So he gathers the 11 brothers and he says, hey, I had this awesome dream last night. You never guess what happened. We were like all working in the fields and we were like corn stalks. And my stalk stood up straight and then there were 11 other stalks that bowed down to my stalk. Wait, how many of you again? 11, that's right. What do you think that dream means? Joseph says, one day you're going to bow down to me and worship me, basically. And that was it. They had had enough. They were like, we are done with you. And so a little bit later, they had this opportunity because they were shepherding their flocks way out in the wilderness, way away from dad. Joseph came out to see him because he was going to get a report on him and go back and tattletale on him. That's what little brothers do, right? That's what he was going to do. And so he goes out and meets them, and they're like, Dad's nowhere around. We're in the wilderness. They grab Joseph. They rip off the Technicolor dream coat, it's ours now, and they throw Joseph in a pit, in a cistern, and they sit down and they have a meal. The Bible says they have a meal. They have a picnic while they threw their brother in a pit and they're deciding what to do with him. Some say we should kill him. Some say we should let him go. But then at that time, by coincidence, a group of traders, slave traders, Ishmaelites, the Bible calls them, they come by and they say, I know what we'll do. We'll sell Joseph as a slave to these guys. And so they take Joseph out of the pit and they sell him as a slave and send him packing. Now, I was an older brother. I did a lot of very cruel things to my little brother in my day. I did convince him at one point that we had bought him on the side of the road. But I would never have sold him, literally. You're like, you thought your family was messed up. This is a messed up family. And so Joseph is gone. The brothers go back. They take the Technicolor dream coat. They dip it in some blood. They say to their dad, look, is this your brother's cloak? A wild animal must have came out and killed him. We don't know what happened. And so they lie. And they think at that moment that Jacob, their father, is going to take all the love he's been pouring on Joseph and then transfer it to them. See, they're seeking a God. They're seeking acceptance. They're seeking love in their lives. But instead, it sends their father, Jacob, as it would any father, into a spiral of depression. And Jacob sinks down and sinks low. Meanwhile, what's happening to Joseph? He's been sold as a slave. He moves on. Chapter 39 says it's not as bad as it could be because he gets sold as a slave to this guy named Potiphar. And Potiphar is like a high-ranking captain. He's like upper middle class. He's mobile and he's on the move. And he makes Joseph like head slave, head steward in the whole house. And Joseph is working hard. Joseph is dominating. Joseph is getting more responsibility and more authority until Potiphar's wife lays eyes on Joseph. See, Potiphar's gone all day, and the Bible says Joseph was young, and he was attractive, and he was handsome, and Potiphar's wife starts looking at Joseph and says, and she tries to seduce him, like Mrs. Robinson style on him. Some of you got the reference, some of you didn't. So she tries to seduce him, but Joseph resists sin. He says, I can't sin against my master and sin against God by doing this wicked thing. And day after day, Joseph is resisting temptation, resisting sin, until one day she gets so frustrated that she tries to grab him down and she rips his robe, his cloak, another cloak ripped from Joseph. And because he won't sleep with her, when Potiphar gets home, she's so angry, she says, trumps up some charges and says that he tried to sleep with her. And like any husband, he goes into a rage, he gets mad, he throws Joseph into prison, into a dungeon. Now, at this point, what do you think Joseph's mindset is? All right, the first one, I got sold into slavery. They shouldn't have done it, but like I did deserve like a kick in the pants. Like I was proud, I was loudmouth, I was whatever. Like I deserve part of that. But Lord, Then I'm sold as a slave. I'm working as a servant. I'm working hard. And then I'm resisting sin. I'm trying to do the right thing. I don't want to sin against you. I'm fleeing away from this temptation thrown in my face every day. And what does it get me? It gets me thrown in the dungeon. God, what's the deal? I get like, okay, I was a proud, arrogant punk and I got kind of punished for that, but like I was doing good. If you're not going to work for me, Lord, at least don't work against me. Have you ever had that conversation with the Lord? God, what are you doing? Like, I'm trying here. I'm trying to be obedient. I'm trying to follow you. I'm trying to discern your will. I'm trying to walk in your paths and trust in your grace and follow your son, Jesus. Like, and yet it just keeps getting worse. What is happening to me? See, if anybody ever told you, just believe in God, believe in Jesus, and your life's going to suddenly get better, everything's going to work out well for you, they weren't reading this Bible. Jesus is the main character of the story of the Bible. How does life work for him? And Jesus says, is a servant above his master. But here's the deal. Here's what we find out with Joseph, is that the presence of pain is not the same as the absence of God. The presence of pain is not the absence of God. There's clearly the presence of pain. In fact, if you read the whole Joseph narrative, one of the things you see repeated again and again and again, at least 9 times, is weeping. You don't see that much in the Bible, but 9 times Joseph said to be weeping and just crying and just pouring tears. There's just weeping. But simultaneously, right beside it, especially in chapter 39, it says, but God was with Joseph. But God was with Joseph. But God was with Joseph. It just repeats it again and again and again and again. You say, yeah, I'm sure God was with Joseph when he exalted him to be the ruler of Egypt and all that stuff. No, it's when he's in the dungeon when it repeats it the most times. When he is in the dungeon, it is the presence of pain, is not the absence of God. And he's saying, whatever dungeon of despair you're in, you can still turn to God in the dungeon. You can still come to God in the dungeon. In fact, God is present and sometimes most palpably, physically, tangibly present when we are in the dungeon. The great preacher Charles Spurgeon once said that nobody will wear the crown in heaven who does not carry the cross on earth. It's the way of the cross. Now here's the deal for Joseph. He's not just in any dungeon. Whose dungeon is he in? If you read the story, he's in Pharaoh's dungeon. He's in the king's dungeon. And he's there for a long time. He's there for several years. But one day, Pharaoh gets mad at 2 of his cabinet members, the cupbearer and the baker, and he sends them to prison. And Joseph gets to know the cabinet officials because he's there in prison. And one night, the 2 officials have dreams, and they come to Joseph and say, we heard you can interpret dreams. And Joseph says, well, by God's power, I actually can interpret dreams. And he tells them the dream, and I won't go into all the details, but basically he says to the cupbearer, in 3 days, Pharaoh the king will restore you to your office. He says, thank you so much. That gives me so much confidence. Now the other guy's hanged and killed, but for this guy, Joseph really helped. Like it helped him out. So he says, all right, you're going to be restored to the king's office in 3 days. When that happens, when you get to Pharaoh, don't forget me, bro. Like, don't bail on me. Remember me and get me out of this piece. And so Joseph is going like, all right, 3 more days, man, and I am there. As soon as that cupbearer gets to Pharaoh, I'm busting out of here. He's been there 11 years at this point. 11 years. He was 17 when he was sold. He's now 28 years old. And he's thinking, 3 more days, and I'm out. What happens? At the very end of chapter 40, it says, yet the chief cupbearer did not remember Joseph, but forgot him. Chapter 41 says, and then after 2 more years. You ever been in that spot where you're like, man, I'm just about to get over the hump. I'm just about to do this thing. Like life's just about to finally turn my way, and then it is like you get rolled back to the bottom of the hill. That's what happened to Joseph. 2 more years, he is there in the dungeon. That's 13 total years now. I don't know about you, I have the tolerance for about 6 months of persistence and prayer and waiting on God and being patient and all that kind of stuff. Joseph's already in 13 years. He's already got 13 years. And what we see is that suffering becomes this great God revealer. See, when suffering comes into our life, everything gets focused, everything narrows down. What is really important starts to come to the surface. The curtains get drawn back and going, hey, this is really what is in my heart. This is really the things that I love. And we start to find out, suffering comes, we start to find out, man, what I really love, what I really worship, what I really give see, you're like, well, I'm not even a Christian, I don't really worship God. Whoever you are, you're a worshiper. You're giving your time and your energy and your allegiance to someone or something. What is that thing? What is that person? And when suffering comes in, it reveals it. It draws the curtains back on our lives and says, man, it was comfort. It was security. It was money. It was status. It was reputation. It was sexuality. It was my work. It was one of those things. And when suffering comes into your life and does that and reveals and pulls the curtains back, the question will then become, will I just pick up a new God, or will I worship the true God? Am I just going to pick up a new God, or am I going to worship the true God? Because what happens in suffering is that typically all of us in suffering, we either turn on God or we turn to God. As Tim Keller said, suffering makes us either bitter or it makes us better. Suffering makes us either turn on God or it makes us turn to God. And what we see is that all this time, Joseph is still turning to God, because after that 2 more years, Pharaoh then has 2 dreams. Joseph had 2 dreams. The cabinet official has 2 dreams. Now Pharaoh has 2 dreams. And the cupbearer goes, wait a minute. I know a guy who can interpret dreams. I forgot him, but now I remember him. So they bring Joseph up out of the pit and they send him before Pharaoh. Pharaoh tells him the dream, and Joseph, without getting into the details, Joseph goes, here's the dream. You're going to have 7 years in the land of plenty, harvest. And then you're going to have 7 years of famine, devastation. And if I were you, I would store up a lot of grain and food in those 7 years and then distribute it all during the 7 years of famine. And Pharaoh goes, that is a brilliant idea. You're brilliant. You're the one that I should ask to do this. And Joseph in chapter 41, verse 16, he gives credit to God. He goes, it's not me, it is God who has given you this answer. So in all this suffering, in all this absence of God, he has not turned on God, he has turned to God. And so Pharaoh raises him up and makes him prime minister, second command of all of Egypt. And then there's 7 years of plenty, and then the massive famine strikes. You're like, man, now there's a famine, there's all this, now there's a famine. What is happening? But see, it's the famine now, it's this other piece of suffering that's going to bring the rest of the story into focus. Because you got to be wondering, right, what happened to Joseph's dad? What happened to his brothers? Well, meanwhile, back at the ranch, they're sitting around, the famine's on, their stomachs are growling, they're starting to get hungry, and Jacob, Joseph's dad, hears a rumor. I heard this rumor that in Egypt there's this brilliant new leader, this brilliant new ruler, and he's stored up grain, and we could go buy food from him during this famine. Why don't you guys go and see him? And that's how 10 of Joseph's bedraggled brothers end up literally on his doorstep. And this is what it says in chapter 42, verse 6. Remember the dream from 37. My stalk was upright, yours are all bowing down to me. Chapter 42, verse 6. Joseph's brothers came, and they bowed themselves with their faces to the ground before Joseph. And you're like, man, that is so cool, because he had the dream, and they were bowing down to him, and now here it is, it's fulfilled. The brothers show up, and they bow down to him. Between chapters 37 and chapters 42, 22 years. 22 years of waiting. It's 22 years from promise to fulfillment. How often in those 22 years was Joseph crying out to God, where are you? How many times was Joseph through those 22 years crying out, and seemingly his prayers went unheard, went unanswered. Seemingly God was aloof and distant and absent and not paying any attention to what was going on to this man who was trying to walk with him and serve him. And day after day and month after month and year after year, God is almost constantly saying no, 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 no to Joseph's prayers. Constant no. Well, we see the truth is that all that time, God actually was hearing and responding to Joseph's prayers. just not in the way or the form or the timing that Joseph would have liked, would have asked for. See, I see this all the time. Don't you see this? Like, there are tons of times I pray with people, pray with lots of you after service and during the week, and sometimes, like, God just instantly answers. Sometimes it just, or within like the day or week, like just instantly, and sometimes I just pray and pray and pray and pray, and it's like nothing. And what Joseph's story is showing us is that God is as lovingly involved in the seeming silences as he is in the momentary miracles. See, God doesn't answer our prayer by giving us everything we ask for. He gives us everything we would have asked for if we knew everything that he knows. He doesn't give us everything we ask for. He gives us everything we would have asked for if we knew everything that he knows. See, if Joseph hadn't gone through the dungeon, look what wouldn't have happened. He would have never gotten to Egypt. He would have never met those officials. He would have never met Pharaoh. He would have never interpreted those dreams. He would have never been raised up to number 2 in command of all of Egypt and fed the world during a massive famine. And more than that, his smarmy, smart mouth, proud, arrogant character, surface dysfunction in the family, none of that would have ever been redeemed or transformed. But because he went to the school of suffering, God is going to transform all of these things. See, initially Joseph had the dream and he told his brothers about it because he cared more about bowing than serving. He cared more about people bowing down to him than serving. This is a great danger for any leader, any volunteer. See, if you come like, I want to be a volunteer in the church. I want to lead a community group. I want to be a service pastor. I want to become a deacon. I want to become an elder. If any of us take those responsibilities on, we're more excited about the bowing, people going, help me, and I can help them, and I can give them wisdom. If we're more excited about the bowing than we are the serving, then we've totally lost our way. And that's why God takes Joseph through this furnace, through this dungeon. And I see this working out, like it's worked out so many times in my own life, and just a couple of stories that, you know, when I came to seminary straight out of college, I felt God was calling me to the ministry, so I was kind of this young, smart-mouthed guy. I thought I knew everything, and I was studying, and I was going to write, and I was going to fix all these problems, and preach, and teach, and lead, and do all this stuff, and I had all these ideas of, you know, delusions of grandeur, and all this kind of stuff in my mind. And when I got to seminary and started working and studying and doing all the things I thought I was supposed to do, then God graciously gave me a couple of gifts that I didn't see as gifts at the time. And the first thing he gave me was a lack of financial resources. And I hated that because I had all these friends around me and they had families or churches or people, whatever, support. They could do grad school without, but I didn't have that, so I had to take a job. And then I got this job and I was at a church, but it wasn't doing ministry at a church. It was a large church and they needed somebody to work in the facilities department and kind of be like the janitor and the guy that took out the trash and cleaned all the bathrooms and took all the orders. And man, I hated that job at first, and they had like a school there, and the school was too cheap to buy like nice, like thick trash can liners. And so when the kids all had lunch, like all these elementary kids slamming their milk and stuff into these little cheap things, like it all bust everywhere every day. So I'm like cleaning up kids' food and milk and taking that stuff out, and like, God, what are you doing? I'm supposed to be preparing. I'm supposed to be studying for ministry. And then one of my friends goes, you are studying for ministry. You are preparing for ministry, because if you think you're going to be a pastor and not be a servant and not serve people, then you're going to destroy people. And so that job became one of the formative experiences of my life. Cleaning up problems at the bathroom became a great formative experience in my life. And then halfway through seminary, great blessing, I got married. And my wife and I got married about halfway through. And I've told some of you this, and I won't go into all the details, but 4 months into our marriage, my wife was diagnosed with rheumatoid arthritis, with an autoimmune disease. And it's where the immune system just attacks the joints and goes after your body. And just quickly, my young 26-year-old, like healthy, athletic wife just melted before me. And suddenly she couldn't do like simple things like open jars and peel bananas and get into the bathtub or shower or whatever. Like I had to do all these things for her and with her. And we're going, God, we're two people, we're in seminary, we're studying, we're trying to serve you. Like, if you're not going to work for us, at least don't work against us. What are you doing? What's going on? If you're so good, so gracious, why is this so hard? Why would God allow all those things? Ultimate answer, I don't know. There are a trillion reasons in the mind of an infinite God that are beyond my comprehension. But I can say that at least two he has revealed to me. And one is that instead of me pursuing all my intellectual pursuits and doing all the things, and I was going to write and read and study and do all this stuff, God gave me a person to love and to serve. And it was formative. It was a school. It was real seminary. And then early on, those first years, she's actually fine now. Or at least been fine for several years. But for those first 5 years of marriage, it bound us together. It formed us together. It knitted our hearts together in ways that probably never would have happened otherwise. Like I would have been off pursuing my deal and distracted and not paying any attention, but instead it molded our hearts together and it knit us together like probably nothing else ever would have. So God prepares us. See, what school are you in right now? What school have you been in that you're missing it? You've despised it. Because you can't imagine what possibly God could be thinking, what possibly God could be doing. How do you not miss it? Joseph ended up not missing it, not despising it. See, in Joseph's life, it was the dungeon. We'll see next week, Moses' life, 40 years in the wilderness as a shepherd, then 40 more in the wilderness with, leading people out of Exodus. How do we not miss those moments? And what we find in Joseph's story, he eventually forgives his brothers, he restores them, he loves them, he reconciles them, this whole long, convoluted process, which is kind of amazing to watch and see if you read the story. But how does he do it? If you look in our verse in chapter 50, verse 19, it says, Joseph says to his brothers, do not fear, for am I in the place of God? Am I in the place of God? We know the answer is no, right? But it's a gospel that Joseph has preached to himself personally. He's preached again and again and again and saying, I am not God. God is wiser than me. He is bigger than me. His ways are not my ways. And so he's preached that to himself again and again. So his brothers have betrayed him and hurt him and done evil against him, but he's able to forgive and not have any bitterness and totally let it go. Why? Because he goes, who knows what someone else deserves for their sin? I don't. Only God knows that. Who can give them what they deserve? Only God. And he goes, am I in the place of God? Am I in the place to judge how my life should have gone? Am I in the place to judge how you should have done your life? I am not God. And see, often we pose as God. We go, Lord, I know how my life should, I know what should be going on in my life. I know how this should be breaking down. But Joseph says, no, I'm not in the place of God. And there's more than that. Then there's this act of trust. Climax of the whole book of Genesis, verse 20. He says to his brothers, as for you, you meant evil against me, but God has meant it for good. You meant evil, but God has turned it for good. What you did is still evil and to be wept over, but God has used it for good. And what he's saying is that if you are a Christian, if you are a child of God, that God is so great, so powerful, so transcendent, that he is taking all of history, all the coincidences in your life, and he is molding them and shaping them, even not just to defeat suffering, not just to defeat evil, but to take even the purposes of evil and twist them for his good, for your good, for his glory. That's what he is able to do. And it says, you meant it for evil, but God has turned it. He's twisted it. He has made it for your good. That is what he's able to do with those purposes. And ultimately, what Joseph does is actually point us beyond himself. He points us not to the true Joseph to come. See, Joseph is a type of the one who was to come. He was a forerunner of Jesus himself. There's this whole pattern that sets up in the Bible, and clearly Joseph is pointing to Jesus. What are some of those things? You see all these equivalences. We can't kind of explain them all and go through them all, but look, like Joseph, Jesus was the chosen deliverer. Like Joseph, he was disliked by his brothers. He was rejected by his own. He was sold for silver coins. The rejection of Jesus led to deliverance, and Jesus, like Joseph, became the ruler of many nations. Jesus is the truer and better Joseph. It's this paradigm that always happens in the Old Testament where God's chosen deliverer is rejected by envy and injustice by his closest friends and his closest family, but God uses that very rejection to bring about redemption. What they meant for evil, God has taken and twisted for good. And of course, it's the same with Jesus. We are blessed by the brother we rejected. See, we rejected Jesus. We said, I am God. I am my own God. I will be my own God. We reject you so much to the point we will put you on a cross. It was that very rejection that led to our redemption. What we meant for evil, God has turned and used for good. Our rejection has become our redemption. See, if you were actually present, if you had been present with Joseph, you'd been his cellmate, and you had heard him year after year after year praying out to God who doesn't hear and doesn't answer, doesn't respond. And if you had been personally present at the cross to see Jesus the Messiah suffering and dying, churning your stomach, if you had been personally present in those, you would go, if this is how God treats his servants, I'm done with him. I want nothing to do with this. He may not even be real. You would run away from him. You would go, how could God ever bring anything good from this? And yet you would have just witnessed the greatest, most powerful, most beautiful redemption ever done for human beings. See, Joseph grew up to feed the nations, and Jesus grew up to save the world. What we meant for evil, God has turned to good. And if we were there present, we would have gone, where is God? He's not here. And we would have missed it all what? For lack of imagination, for God being too big for our categories, for God doing things beyond what we could hope, what we could think, what we could imagine that he might do. We would have missed it. This is a great quote by a smart woman named Evelyn Underhill, and she says, if God were small enough to understand, he wouldn't be big enough to worship. If God were so small we could understand him in our mind, our imagination, he wouldn't be big enough for us to stand up and worship him. If he could be totally analyzed and understood, then he wouldn't be worthy of proclaiming and preaching and trusting and loving and worshiping. So listen, we don't know for sure what the reason is for suffering. We don't know for sure all the things God is doing. We don't know for sure what the reason is. We know what it is not. It is not that he is absent. It is not that he doesn't care. It is not that he is not paying attention. It is not that he is not real. He hates suffering and loves you so much that he became personally involved. He sent his own son, Jesus, who paid, defeated sin, death, and hell, who paid and atoned for our sins. That's how much. See, what have you faced in the past that made you question God? What are you walking through right now? What are you going to go through in the future? Joseph and ultimately Jesus shows us that we can trust God in the storm. We can trust God in the dungeon. We can trust God under the water. We can trust God in the furnace. Why? Because Jesus went to the ultimate furnace. And his rejection on the cross has become our redemption. What we meant for evil, God has used for good. And Isaiah put it like this in Isaiah 53, prophesying Jesus and his suffering. It says, Jesus was despised, rejected by men, a man of sorrows, acquainted with grief. But surely he has borne our griefs and carried our sorrows. But he was wounded for our transgressions, crushed for our iniquities. What good could come with this? The final verse. By his stripes, we are healed. What we meant for evil, God has used for good. Let's pray. Father, I thank you that you are so profound, so powerful, that you work beyond our imaginations and beyond our categories. That, Lord, you are so powerful, you're so gracious that you take even suffering, even pain, even evil, and you turn it and you twist it, you form our character, you shape it for good. Lord, these things are painful, hard realities. And so I pray you'd be with my friends, with my brothers and sisters that are suffering right now, Lord, that you would come and be present with them, they would experience you, they would feel your presence. Your word says you draw near to the brokenhearted, so come and do that. We know that you draw near because you drew so near, you sent your son Jesus. In whose name we pray. Amen.